Hey guys, what's up? So I was at a loss for what to do this week, and then someone so kindly commented on one of my old videos being like, hey, can you read some more fanfiction? I really liked that, it was fun. So I'm gonna read some more fanfiction. First I want to talk a little bit, I don't want to send the wrong message. Your writing develops over time, it gets better, and so don't be afraid to do this and write even if it sounds like it might be shitty, because the only way that you're going to learn how to become a better writer is if you keep writing. So to that end, we're going to look at something that I wrote when I was not as good of a writer as I am now. It's one of my first Harry Potter fanfictions. It's a Hermione fanfiction. Back then, I thought Hermione was cool, and now I'm more of a Drury shipper, honestly. And let's not get into the ship wars, let's just be friends and read this terrible fanfiction. So, this is called The Dragon's Tale. Chapter 1, Second Year. Like the other Slytherins, Draco was straining to get a peek into the hospital wing. However, unlike the other Slytherins, he actually cared about who might be in there. They were there out of curiosity. He was there out of anxiety. Potter and Weasley were in there. That wasn't a good sign. Draco tried to convince himself of possible alternatives. Maybe this time the heir of Slytherin had chosen a blood traitor instead of a mudblood. Maybe the teachers were questioning Potter. After all, they did suspect him. Any explanation, except the one he so dreaded, was the truth. Let's stop right there and point out that Draco is using a racial slur to refer to this person that he supposedly loves. So that's what I thought was healthy when I was 13. Yikes. "All right, out!" Madame Pomfrey shouted, shooing the students away. The Slytherins scattered. Try saying that 3 times fast. Draco grabbed Crabbe and Goyle's sleeves and led them off to a nook near the entrance of the hospital wing, where they could wait. Eventually, Potter and Weasley appeared in the hall, their faces grim. "So, Potter," Draco droned, feigning an air of nonchalance. "Who's the unlucky mudblood this time?" Again with the slurs! Not good, Draco. Potter looked up at him with tortured eyes. From just that gaze, Draco could tell what he was going to say without him even having to say it. His heart dropped. It took all Draco had to plaster a sneer on his face. "Finally got what she deserved, filthy Draco couldn't even finish. Weasley had leapt, barely restrained by Potter. Draco skittered backwards. Note again, he's trying to say mudblood, and what is preventing him from doing so is not his own conscience, apparently, but someone else who knows that that's not a good word to say, trying to fucking deck him. "Crabbe! Goyle, let's go!" he shouted, his voice breaking. He wasn't going to be able to keep up the facade much longer. Again with the little squiggly thing. I'm so fucking pretentious. He flew down the corridor, Crabbe and Goyle tailing behind. Later that night, Draco crept into the hospital wing, cautiously peeking around every corner to make sure he wasn't spotted. No one could know he was there, not even the person he was there to see. If word got to his father that he was in love with a Muggle-born, well, he couldn't even begin to think what would happen. Making sure there was no sign of Madame Pomfrey, Draco tiptoed silently to the side of her bed. He took her hand, it was stiff and cool and hard as stone, and pressed his lips against it. "I'm really sorry about all those things I called you. I don't really think you're a mudblood. I think you're smart, and pretty, and nice." So now he's like uncomfortable using that word, but all the other times he was cool with it. Dude, just don't use that word. It's a magical slur. Draco thought about all those times he watched her laughing from his place with the Slytherins. Fear coursed through him. Would he ever hear her laugh again? Ever see the light in her eyes when she answered a question from a teacher? Ever see her bite her lip and brush her hair back with the top of her quill as she was concentrating in class? This was all his fault. Draco knew it. If he'd just left her alone, she'd be okay. Somehow, in that twisted logic one only uses when a loved one is in danger, that made perfect sense. Draco's fucked up. Draco sighed, Gasping as the breath hitched up in his throat, he began to cry. He pressed his face into the stone-cold hand and wept, moaning one name over and over again. Hermione. 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 I'd like to point out that I thought, my 13-year-old self thought that she was being real clever, hiding the identity of who Draco was in love with until the very end of that chapter. When, if you're searching for this online, one of the first things that's going to come up is, like, pairing Draco and Hermione. And also, like, who else was it going to be? So, great job, but also, that was pointless, and I hate you. Chapter 2, 3rd year. Draco may have taken it a little too far this time, but he couldn't help it. His hatred for that wild, dangerous hippogriff, he hated it even more for making him look stupid in front of the one girl he absolutely had to impress, was perfect fodder for his taunting. He didn't care how much dislike he was inciting, as long as he could see the fire in Hermione's eyes. She was pretty when she's mad. That's unhealthy. Caught up in Hermione's intensity, Draco didn't notice the fist coming his way until it was too late. The force knocked him off his feet, a cruel echo of the way he'd first felt when he saw the girl who was now punching him in the face. Jesus Christ. But he could barely feel the pain. Hermione was shining, and not like that Hufflepuff 6-year. Twilight joke, everyone! Ha! She was just radiant. Her face was full of shock, her eyes and her stance exuded strength. Draco liked this. So much, in fact, that he didn't even notice the blood spurting out of his nose and onto his shirt. Kinky. Chapter 3, 4th year. Draco was hiding. He was hiding from his date. He was hiding from Hermione's date. Most of all, he was hiding from Hermione. He'd known going into the Yule Ball that she'd be harder to resist, that she'd be especially breathtaking. How could she not be? But when she'd walked in, it had taken all of Draco's energy to stay rooted to the spot, not to go running up to her and spill his secret. She'd walked in alone, which had only drawn even more attention to her. She'd been blushing furiously, staring at her feet as she made her way down the staircase. All the same, she'd been wearing a broad smile. Her eyes had welled up slightly. When she'd entered the crowd, she ducked her head and squeezed her shoulders as if she was avoiding a particularly low bit of ceiling. She'd glanced at Weasley, who'd been gaping as though she'd come in wearing a marshmallow. Funny metaphor. And had given her arm to the Durmstrang champion. Draco ran for it. At first, he'd been hiding because he'd been crying. It wasn't fair. If it wasn't for his father's hatred of Muggleborns, Draco would have been able to tell Hermione how he felt the first time they'd met. But Draco was trapped, terrified that if he showed her the smallest bit of affection, he'd tip his hand. Now, however, he was hiding so he wouldn't get another look at Hermione. He could just imagine her beaming face and see her hair falling out of her meticulous updo. And for now, imagining was almost too much. Then again, it was never really enough either. Here's the part where I should note that I am very, very prone to crushes, and this whole unrequited love thing was a bit of a theme for me. Jeez, what a bummer, right? Chapter 4, 5th year. Under unspoken orders from his father, Draco joined the inquisitorial squad. He liked the bit where he tried to get Potter and Weasley into trouble, but that bit was overshadowed heavily by his concern for Hermione. Yo, if you like a bitch and you don't like her friends, then get the fuck over it, because they're her friends and she's not going to give them up just because you like her. Pro tip. He knew what Umbridge was capable of. As much as Draco wanted to help Hermione, he was afraid Umbridge's favorite weapon, Veritaserum, wasn't reserved for only her enemies. It was really awkwardly worded, wasn't it? Professor Snape seemed to have picked up on Draco's anxiety, because he called the boy into his office to talk. Is something upsetting you, Draco? Are you in danger? Asked Professor Snape from across his desk. It's a great Snape impression, isn't it? You're welcome. Draco looked away. Yes, something was upsetting him. but it would upset his father even more if he found out. On the other hand, the truth was threatening to burst out of him at any minute. What with his worrying, his lack of sleep, and the fact that the secret had been kept for so long, passive construction, wee-woo, wee-woo, he was afraid he might let down his guard. And if he even stared at her for a minute too long, the truth might come out, becoming mist in the air and expanding into every nook and cranny, eventually finding his father. Surely if he told one person, just one, then a bit of the burden would be taken off his shoulders. Passive construction! Wee-woo, wee-woo! He looked up at the teacher with pleading eyes and asked, "If I told you, promise you wouldn't tell anyone?" "Not a soul." Draco took a deep breath and then said, "I think I'm falling in love." Professor Snape said, confused. Then Draco murmured, "With Hermione Granger." "I could be falling in love, falling in love, falling in love with Hermione Granger." Six-star kid reference! Comprehension dawned on Snape, and his eyes went dark. He leaned over the desk, speaking with great urgency. "Draco, you must listen to me. You need to tell her, soon, and don't taunt her anymore. Don't make her angry at you, angrier than she must be already. And never, do you hear me, never call her a mudblood. Do you understand?" Draco understood. He understood that if he did these things, his father might go so far as to disown him. Sassy! "What do you know about what I'm going through right now? What could you possibly know?" he challenged. Professor Snape sighed heavily. He just sat there, staring into nothing. That didn't help Draco at all. If anything, it made him feel even worse. "Thanks a lot," he hissed. Then he picked up his books and left. That night, Marietta Edgecombe told Umbridge some valuable information. Dun dun dun! Hope you've read the books and done your homework, kiddos. Here's the part where I note that I was really into Snape and Lily's relationship at that point in my life. And now I realize that it was super unhealthy and weird. But back then I was like, it's the most romantic fucking thing ever. So there's that. Chapter 5, 6th year. Draco was stalling. He was waiting for anyone to catch him. He couldn't do it. He couldn't kill Dumbledore. Because if he was the one to kill Dumbledore, Hermione would hate him. She wouldn't just dislike him, she would hate him. She'd want him dead. And Draco couldn't let that happen. So you have no problem taking a human life, but having the girl you like hate you, that's much worse. Draco's heart soared when he heard footsteps climbing the stairs. Maybe it was McGonagall, or Flitwick, or Filch. Maybe it was Hermione. It wasn't. Of anyone it could have been, why did it have to be them? He couldn't stall in front of the Death Eaters. They'd know. Just as Draco was beginning to lose hope, another set of feet pounded up the staircase. He turned to look. Professor Snape! He knew! He could help! He'd understand! Draco silently beseeched him. Severus, please. Avada Kedavra. Chapter 6. Epilogue. We're finally almost done, you guys. People say that when they look back on their life, they hope they have no regrets. If that was how you measured a life, then Draco's was terrible. He regretted becoming a Death Eater. He regretted not telling his father to bugger off. British! Most of all, he regretted not taking Professor Snape's advice so long ago. Draco now wondered what made the potions master say those things. Maybe, wherever he was going, Draco could find out. And he knew he was going. He could feel the life draining out of him. His relatives were at his bedside, keeping watch. His wife was sobbing. Draco had married Astoria to appease his father. He was getting old and ill, and Draco wanted to make sure he was happy. 2 days after his marriage, Lucius died. 2 days after that, Draco heard of Hermione's engagement to Ron Weasley. That's unfortunate. Draco could never figure out why he hadn't gone to her. Maybe he'd lost hope, or maybe he'd grown attached to Astoria. Or maybe he just realized by then that if you truly love someone, all you really want is for them to be happy. Aw, that's so sweet. Maybe you could have made her happy more when you were a shit-nosed little kid. Draco looked back on his life and regretted. He regretted every time he'd uttered the word mudblood. He'd regretted the timed Typo! When he angered Hermione just so he could see the fire in her eyes. He regretted, above all else, not telling her the secret he'd kept so long. As Draco's life ebbed away, so did the bars on the cage where his secret was kept. With all his strength, he said the words he wanted the world to know. I love Hermione. And with those words, the dragon breathed his last. I thought that was a romantic ending when I was a teenager. So yikes. Also, I love how I introduced that dragon metaphor in the title, and then I reintroduced it at the end, but in the entire middle part, it disappeared. There was no mention of dragons or anything. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a thumbs up and a comment if you really liked it. Subscribe if you want more. And help me get to 52 by the end of the year. Finger guns.